Hey everybody, it's Dana. I have wanted to revisit this learning to read your label topic for a little while now. And so I thought I would take a couple minutes to do that today because it's a question that comes up extremely often. So I picked Blue Buffalo. It's a very common brand of food. A lot of people are of the opinion that it is a exceptionally good dog food. I think it's fair, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about how you can make some decisions about the foods that you're choosing. Okay, so if we look at Blue Wilderness, chicken, right? We're just going to go down their page. This is a very common choice. The first thing that I would suggest you consider is that chicken in and of itself is highly contributory, if that's a word, to allergens in dogs. So it can often have a lot of allergic response to it in our dogs. If we look at it from a traditional Chinese medicine point of view, it is a hot protein. That doesn't mean it has temperature heat. It means how it fuels the body, and how the body responds to a protein like this is by hot, by definition hot. That means we can get into things like agitation, difficulty learning, frustration, seeming to be hot or panting when it's not hot outside or when they have not been exercising. And there's a whole list of things, right? So for a dog that is cool by nature, feeding a hotter protein may be appropriate, right? But for a dog that is hotter in his normal constitution, feeding a hot protein is like adding fuel to the fire and could make things a whole lot worse. So if we're dealing with itchy, scratchy skins, red, hot, on fire skin, behavioral issues, the protein source is one of the first things that I suggest we sit down and review. So chicken is not top of the list for things that I think most of us should be considering. So then if we go on down, and you guys can all look at this on your bag of food as you buy it or as you're shopping for food, you can look at this guaranteed analysis. I'm waiting for my screen to catch up, and I may not need to watch both. The guaranteed analysis. So you're going to see a chart that looks like this one, right, on your bag of food. You're going to see crude protein, crude fat, crude fiber, and moisture. Okay? The protein at 34%, that's total protein in the bag, right? Not just the percentage of protein for that ingredient, but the percentage of total protein in the bag. 34% is actually on the higher side, right? If I were feeding, for example, a Great Dane puppy, a large breed dog, I might not want that much protein going into the body. If I'm feeding a senior citizen dog, then maybe not do I need more protein. But if I have a dog that's bouncing off the walls with a boatload of energy that is not a working dog or a highly active dog, he's just sort of got that bouncing off the walls kind of energy that's a little bit out of control, the percentage of protein would factor into the decisions of what I'm going to choose as the way to feed him and potentially address some behavioral concerns, okay? But when we add these 4 ingredients up, the first 4, protein, fat, fiber, and moisture, This comes out to 55%. 55% of the bag is our protein, fat, fiber, and moisture. Moisture is nothing more than water, right? Nothing more than adding some moisture to that bag. So then you have to ask yourself, what is the rest of the content of the bag? Even if we look at the ingredients below that in this chart, we're not going to add up to a significantly higher number, and we're certainly not approaching 100%, right? So what do we know about the way labels work? That what's in the bag, the difference, is some sort of carbohydrate, some sort of sugar type ingredient. So we know carbohydrates, we know we need them, but we also know they turn to sugar, and then how much. So again, if we think about a kid that's had too much candy, and we compare that to a dog that's getting too much carbohydrate that they are not burning off, then we may have a dog that is getting too much sugar in their diet. And we know that sugar can contribute to inflammation in the body, and inflammation in the body can lead to dis-ease, right? It can lead to things that cause pain, illness, injury, and actual disease in the body. So we have to be very careful about these things. These middle of the road foods, 45% carbohydrate is a fair amount. That's quite a lot, actually. I have seen some bags as much as 65%. And then, as we move into the higher brands of kibble, we'll see less, but it's still significant. So when you hear people talking about their dog has been diagnosed with some serious diseases and they're trying to move into a keto type diet, getting them off kibble, because kibble feeds the cells of the body that continue to grow and to replicate themselves and become all sorts of problems, right? Sugar's not a good thing in that scenario. It's not a good thing in general on the higher scales. Okay? So that's a couple of flags that we look at when we're making our decisions about food. The next thing that we need to take a look at would be the ingredients. Okay? So everybody has gotten into the first ingredient needs to be protein. And I saw a bag in this same line, in their limited ingredient line, that the first ingredient is chicken meal. Now we need to understand when we see chicken meal or turkey meal or fish meal or whatever it is, that that's not only the meat. That's not meat. That's not the fleshy part that you and I would eat. It is some meat, some bone, some muscle, and the cartilage and everything. Basically, it's the carcass of the animal that's been processed down into this mealy, if you've ever seen it, it's very mealy product. It's not the flesh of the meat, it's the everything else, and maybe some of the meat processed down. Now, that will have a significantly higher percentage of total protein than the meat itself. Like maybe 300% more, right? Depending on, how much of that went in versus how much meat, right? So meal can actually give you a higher percentage of protein than the meat itself. But it's not necessarily the best part or the only parts that we need to include in the food. And this is why a product like when we start talking about bone broth, which is we boil down everything till there's nothing left, that is very rich in protein and nutrient, right? but it's not processed in the same way. Okay, so this one shows us deboned chicken. Fair enough, right? Then we move into chicken meal, which is what I was just talking about, and where we start to see, because we're getting cartilage, we're getting muscle, we're getting bone, we're getting all those things, that we can pick up some of the glucosamine benefit, right, into the meal type product. But then look at what starts to happen next. We see peas, pea protein, that's 2 versions of peas, tapioca as the starch component from tapioca, fish meal, so now we're putting in some omega-3. Well, chicken's going to have omegas in it anyway, mostly omega-6, but now we're getting some of the 3 back in there to offset, because you need a balance, you need a ratio, if you will, right? But we've got now 3 ingredients that are starchy, sugary, and also contributing toward the total percentage of protein. So when you look at any product, you've got to look at the next number of ingredients, not just the first one, right? And go, what are they? And are they contributing to my total protein count and to my carbohydrate count, right? So just because we're starting to see the first ingredient listed as a meat source does not mean that that makes up the greatest percentage of your total protein. You could be starting to see plant proteins going in there. They're cheaper, right? They're definitely cheaper, and they are bumping up the percentage of protein that we're seeing in the bag through non-meat sources. Okay? Super important to know. Very important for you to understand that. You'll see this dried tomato pomace. There's a big debate about whether that adds any benefit or not. It is really what's left over from tomatoes when tomato paste and tomato puree and that sort of stuff is made. It's not the tomato, it's leftovers, right? It's residual stuff that was used in some other manufacturing process to make food items elsewhere. It's the leftovers added to your dog's bag of food that a lot of people will consider just adding filler to the product. Okay, so do a little more research on what you're reading. The next thing that we have to take, so now we're back, so I'm just going to go down this list. Fat's okay, right? You've heard me say this when a lot of people move to homemade food, they want to eliminate the fat. They'll do skinless chicken. That's not necessarily your best move. Our dogs and us, we need fats in our diet, right? So this one is pointing out that we're getting fat from the chicken, but I think we also got some fat from the chicken in our chicken meal. So now we're looking at our 15% total fat, right? So you got to see where all these pieces come from. Tocopherols are actually just a way of preserving foods, right? Flaxseed, I think you all understand. We're now back into a pea starch. I'm sorry, their little highlighters are getting me. You're seeing a pea starch. Go away. There we go. A pea starch. So peas again. So we've had peas show up about, well, 3 times so far. If you look down at the next line, it's going to show up again. Okay. We move into natural flavor, egg, alfalfa, chicory root, potatoes, more starch, fiber, minerals are starting to be added in. Color gets added in. The color if you ever see a color in the food, it's for you. The dog doesn't normally care. But I'll remind you that when we talk about the fat in a lot of foods, and I miss commenting on it here, when we talk about chicken fat here, so this looks like we're getting fat from the actual chicken. What happens a lot of times in some lower quality foods is the fat is actually rendered fat, not from the chicken that went into your product per se, but maybe from leftover previous used fat, right? It can even be sprayed on fat from like leftover restaurant use, right? Like actual grease. So not a good thing. So if you ever, when we talk about foods and you open them and they smell rancid, that's what's happening, right? It's been these rancid fats and stuff that have gone in there and gone bad. And as a reminder, when you open your bag of food, you generally have about 2 weeks of freshness before that food product is starting to not be as good as it was when you opened the bag, right? So even if you put it in a tight sealed product, plastic product, every time you open it, air is going in and creating oxidization into those products. Okay, so just be aware of all these things. Now, the next thing we look at, and I just point this out because where salt shows up on the bag is a big deal. The governing bodies of dog food creation and manufacturers basically say that salt cannot exceed more than 1% of the total bag, right? You have to be very careful. Some foods will show up salt in different ways. But when we see that, when we find it on the label, everything that comes after it is going to be less than that percentage, right? These things are typically listed in the order of how much is in the bag. What they don't tell us is you got to add them all up. Like when you see multiple P sources, you got to put all that back together to come up with a total. But when we see salt listed, then everything that's coming after it is less than 1% of what's in the bag. So then when you go look at something like blueberries and cranberry, and sorry, this little thing driving me crazy, blueberries and cranberries and barley and parsley and yucca and kelp, we think, fantastic, we're getting some fruits and vegetables. It's not so great. There's not very much in there, right? There is not a lot of added benefit. So if you go back up and start looking at their marketing words, and it talks about providing antioxidants, we think blueberries are super rich in antioxidants, but they're not getting much. They're not getting very much at all. And the other thing that I'll point out too is when you start adding fruits to your dog's diet, I would encourage you to use them more as a treat than an addition to the food bowl, because of the way the dog's system actually digests protein differently than it does plant sources, than it does fruits and vegetables and so on, which is a plant source, I guess. But to allow the body to do what it needs to do and not sort of have these competing efforts going on in the digestive system. So fruits are fabulous, not too many fruits. Again, we don't want too much natural sugar either going into the body, but to separate out when they are given is a great consideration. All right. When you look at vitamins and minerals, what you have to understand is what was in the original products that went into the ingredients, right? The original ingredients, even if they were whole food sources, when they went in, they got processed out through the manufacturing process, through the heat and the cooking and that process of creating the kibble. So vitamins and minerals have to be added back to the product. we often see synthetic vitamins and minerals being used for that purpose. You can almost guarantee if you are using grocery store brand food or some of these mid-grade retailer foods that the vitamins and minerals will be synthetic. When you get into some of the upper end brands like Akana from Origin, it's less likely to have vitamins and minerals that are synthetic. However, you may be getting the minimum requirement versus an optimal or an ideal. You have to do your research and figure out bag for bag, product for product, what's in there. We also have to understand that at the end of the day, I think there are only like 5, I'll have to verify my number, but only like 5 major food manufacturing companies in the world. Right? Or I'll have to look at my note what Wendy Volhard told us about that. So you've got these big industrial plants that are set up to make dog food, and they make dog food for all of these brands, right? So today they run Blue Buffalo, tomorrow they run Diamond Dog Food, and I'm making up who's with what manufacturer. I have no idea, but they set up the system and they run a line of dog food. And then they get that done, they change the recipe and they do the next one. And then they may even change the brand, right? But it's all happening in the same primary plants. So that's part of why when we see recalls of some of this food, it's pretty big. You know, it could be widespread to what's happening inside that plant as well. So this is all one of the reasons why I kept coming back time and time again to the Volhard brand, because of the quality of the food, because of the benefit of the nutrition that's actually in that bag, of the mix. And then you control adding in your meat. When we dehydrate something, it is not processed in the, it's not these high power, high heat processing. It is simply the elimination of the moisture to dehydrate a product, and the vitamins and minerals and nutrient is left intact. And then, it's beefed up and to get higher values of vitamins and minerals using non-synthetics when we need them. And, to add in probiotics or prebiotics or enzymes and things that fight flea and tick and so on are all built into this product. And the product is actually tested multiple times. The ingredients are tested, the product is tested, it's tested before it's bagged up and sent to us. So I love the quality control that goes with that. I also love the testing, the actual blood work testing of real live dogs that are Wendy's. They are in the client list, right? And they are followed from birth until death with blood panel testing based on eating these foods and their health overall. And so this has been going on for 30 years. So that's a high quality validation, in my opinion, as well. All right. So any questions about making choices for your dog food? It's interesting. They say no byproduct meals, and yet we have a meal source here. So I wonder what they mean by that. I'm not sure what that means. I'll have to go look that up. That's a big question for me. All right, so I'm going to drop off. I hope you found some information to help you as you make your decisions about food here. And to know that the marketing engines are working against your knowledge, right? They want to have you believe the best of everything, and to have you believe that when you see the first ingredient, that's the only one that really matters. And there's so much more to it than that. So my goal, my hope, my only purpose here really is that you all get better education and awareness, and that your dogs stay well, that we help your dog stay as healthy as possible, and that we are not contributing to an illness or a